Sometimes the past you run from is the only thing that can save you, and sometimes it takes a loyal dog to show you the way back. For 30 years, Mabel Craine lived alone in the New Mexico high desert with her German shepherd Duke. She wanted nothing from the world that had broken her heart. But one cold morning, Duke led her to 3 dying men beneath an old bridge. They were strangers. At least, that's what she thought until she looked at their faces. What she saw connected them to the family tragedy that sent her running decades ago. Now these 3 men are in her cabin, and Mabel must face a truth she's avoided her whole life. Can you ever really escape your own blood? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The high desert of New Mexico doesn't forgive mistakes. Mabel Craine learned that truth the hard way, same as she'd learned everything else worth knowing in her 62 years. The land stretches out in all directions from her cabin, a vast expanse of scrub brush, red rock formations, and silence so deep it has its own kind of sound. Most folks would call it lonely. Mabel called it safe. Her cabin sat tucked against a ridgeline, built from local stone and weathered timber she'd hauled herself over the years. Solar panels she'd installed a decade back kept a battery bank charged for the essentials, a radio, some LED lights, the small refrigerator that ran more often than not. Everything else she managed the old way. Wood stove for heat, hand pump for the well, a root cellar dug into the hillside where she kept her preserves and the vegetables that would last through winter. She'd chosen this spot with care 30 years ago, when she first came out here with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart that felt too heavy to carry another mile. The ridge protected her from the worst of the winter winds. The well water ran clean and cold, fed by an underground spring that never went dry. And the old trestle bridge, that skeletal frame of rusted iron spanning a rocky ravine about 2 miles east, served as a landmark she could navigate by even in the dark. That bridge held significance beyond navigation. She'd seen it the first time she came out here, recognized something in its abandoned geometry that matched what she felt inside. Once it had carried trains full of copper ore from the mines up north. Now it carried nothing but the wind and the occasional raven. The railroad company had written it off decades ago, too expensive to maintain, too remote to matter, just like Mabel. Duke lifted his head from where he lay near the wood stove, ears pricked forward. The German shepherd had been with her 5 years now, ever since she'd found him as a half-starved pup wandering the desert, likely dumped by someone who didn't want him anymore. She understood that feeling. They'd taken to each other. Immediately, 2 survivors who didn't need words to communicate. "Just the wind," she told him, though she checked the shotgun leaning against the wall near the door anyway. Old habits. The photograph sat on the mantel above the stove, faces looking out from behind dusty glass. Mabel didn't look at it often, didn't need to. She knew every detail by heart. Her husband, James, standing tall in his work clothes, that slight smile he always wore when he thought nobody was watching. And little Cole, barely a year old, chubby-cheeked and laughing at something just outside the frame. She'd taken that picture 3 weeks before the fire. The official report called it an electrical fault. Old wiring in an older house, sparked in the night, spread faster than anyone could react. James and Cole died in their sleep, the investigators told her. They didn't suffer. She was supposed to find comfort in that, the fact that her husband and baby boy burned to death without waking up. Mabel never believed it. Not then, not now. She'd asked questions, pushed the sheriff's office for answers that made sense. Why were the smoke detectors disabled? Why was the back door locked from the outside? Why did 3 neighbors report seeing a vehicle speeding away from the property minutes before the flames were spotted? The sheriff, a man named Raymond Calhoun, had looked at her with something close to pity and told her that grief made people see conspiracies where there were only tragedies. So she stopped asking questions where they could be heard. She asked them in other ways. She tracked down the fire inspector, bought him enough drinks to loosen his tongue, learned that certain details never made it into the official report. She found the neighbors who'd seen that vehicle, got descriptions, even a partial plate number. She followed those threads as far as they would go, which wasn't far enough. What she found scared her. The threads led to people with money, with power, with connections that ran through the county like roots through hard ground. And beneath it all, she sensed something her husband had been involved in, something he'd known or seen or done that made him dangerous to those people. James had worked for the county assessor's office, evaluating properties, filing reports. Boring work, he'd said, safe work. But in the weeks before the fire, he'd been different, distracted, worried. He'd come home late more than once, smelling of cigarette smoke though he didn't smoke. When she asked what was wrong, he'd kissed her forehead and promised everything would be fine. It wasn't fine. After the funeral, after the investigation closed, after the insurance paid out on a house that had been worth more as ash than as shelter, Mabel made a choice. She could keep digging, keep pushing against people who'd already proven they would kill to protect their secrets, or she could disappear. She disappeared. The insurance money bought her enough supplies to last a year if she was careful. She drove out into the desert until the roads turned to tracks, and the tracks turned to nothing. She found this place, built this life, and told herself she was done with the world that had taken everything from her. 30 years was a long time to be done with something. Her days followed a rhythm as reliable as the seasons. Wake before dawn, check the solar panels and battery levels, feed Duke, make coffee on the wood stove, strong and black. Then the morning chores, tending the small garden she kept in raised beds near the cabin, checking the snares she set for rabbits, maintaining her equipment. Everything had to work perfectly out here. One broken tool, one contaminated water source, one bad injury could mean the difference between survival and something else. Once a month she made the 40-mile drive into town for supplies. Gallup sat on the edge of the high desert like a tired watchdog, half asleep but still keeping one eye open. The locals knew her as the Mountain Woman, though she lived in a valley and these weren't proper mountains anyway. They sold her what she needed, flour, salt, ammunition, kerosene, and didn't ask questions. She preferred it that way. Some of them remembered when she first showed up, wild-eyed and hollow, asking about land nobody wanted. They'd sold her the parcel cheap, probably figured she wouldn't last a winter. When she did, they adjusted their expectations. When she lasted 5 winters, then 10, then 20, she became part of the landscape. Strange, yes, but permanent. She'd taught herself everything she needed to know. How to tan hides, how to reload ammunition, how to set a broken bone, though thankfully she'd only needed that knowledge twice, once for herself, once for Duke, when he'd tangled with a coyote and come away limping. She learned to read the weather in the shape of clouds, the behavior of birds, the smell of the wind. She learned which plants were edible and which would kill you, which herbs could fight infection and which could ease pain. The skills came easier than she'd expected. Maybe because she had no choice. Maybe because something in her had been waiting for this all along, some buried knowledge of how to live close to the earth, how to trust her own hands and her own judgment, instead of depending on systems that had failed her. Duke stood up, stretched, and moved to the door. Morning routine. Mabel pulled on her boots, good leather, resoled twice, treated with mink oil to keep them waterproof, and grabbed her coat from the hook. October in the high desert meant cold mornings and warm afternoons, the kind of temperature swings that could trick you if you weren't careful. She checked the shotgun one more time before leaving it behind. The rifle came instead, slung across her back. Not that she expected trouble, but expectations weren't worth much out here. Reality was what mattered, and reality said a woman alone needed to be ready for anything. The sun hadn't cleared the eastern ridge yet, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that would have looked fake in a painting, but were just another morning out here. Duke trotted ahead, nose to the ground, following scent trails only he could detect. Mabel followed at her own pace, watching the dog, watching the land, watching for anything out of place. This was her favorite time of day, before the world woke up and demanded things, before the heat pressed down and made every movement an effort. Just her and Duke and the clean morning air, cool enough to see her breath, quiet enough to hear the scuff of her boots on the hardpan. They walked east, toward the old trestle bridge. It wasn't a destination exactly, more of a habit. She liked to check the area, make sure nobody had wandered out this far, make sure the structure wasn't deteriorating in some new and dangerous way. The bridge had stood for nearly a century, but time and weather worked on everything eventually. Duke ranged. Ahead, then circled back, then ranged ahead again. Normal behavior. He knew this route as well as she did, had walked it hundreds of times over the past 5 years. But today, something was different. His ears stood sharper. His tail, usually relaxed, stayed level and tense. "What is it?" Mabel asked, though she didn't expect an answer. Duke looked back at her, then toward the bridge, then back at her again. In all their time together, Mabel had learned to read his signals. This one was clear enough. He'd found something. She unslung the rifle and checked the chamber. Loaded. Safety on. She moved forward more carefully now, scanning the terrain, looking for whatever had caught Duke's attention. Could be an animal. Could be people. Could be nothing but a scent on the wind that meant something to a dog and nothing to a human. As they got closer to the bridge, Duke's agitation increased. He stopped circling back, just moved forward in a straight line, purpose in every step. Mabel followed, adrenaline starting to sharpen her senses, her grip tightening on the rifle. Then she saw what Duke had found, and everything changed. 3 men lay in the shadow of the trestle bridge, sprawled in the dirt like broken dolls. Even from 30 feet away, Mabel could see the blood. It darkened their clothes, pooled beneath them, painted streaks across the rocks where they dragged themselves, or been dragged. Duke stood over them, not threatening, just watchful, waiting for Mabel to catch up and make sense of what he'd discovered. She approached with the rifle ready, safety off now, finger along the trigger guard. Her eyes swept the area the bridge supports, the rocks, the scrub brush that could hide someone waiting. Nothing moved except the wind. Whatever had happened here, the people responsible were gone. The men were young, early 30s maybe, though it was hard to tell with their faces dirt-streaked and pain-twisted. 2 were unconscious. The third had his eyes open, though they didn't focus on anything. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Mabel knelt beside the nearest one, keeping the rifle close, and checked for a pulse. Weak, but steady. She moved to the second man. Same result. The third man, the one with his eyes open, had a pulse that fluttered like a trapped bird. Gunshot wounds. Multiple. 2 of the men had taken bullets to the torso, dark stains spreading across their shirts. The third had been shot in the leg, the femur maybe, which explained the massive blood loss. They'd tried to apply pressure, tried to stop the bleeding, but out here without proper supplies, they'd been fighting a losing battle. She should leave them. That was the smart choice. The safe choice. Call it in from town, let the authorities handle it. These could be criminals, drug runners, any kind of trouble she didn't need. But even as the thoughts formed, she knew she wouldn't follow them. Because when she looked at the first man's face, really looked something, in her chest went tight and cold. She knew that face. Or rather, she knew the bones beneath it. The architecture that genetics passed down through bloodlines like an inheritance nobody asked for. High cheekbones, strong jaw, a particular way the eyebrows arched that she'd seen 1,000 times in her bathroom mirror before she stopped keeping mirrors around. "No," she whispered, but the word had no power to change what her eyes told her. Duke whined, pressing his nose against her shoulder. She pushed him back gently and forced herself to think. First priority, keep them alive. Figure out who they were and why they looked like ghosts from her past later. She checked their injuries more thoroughly. The torso wounds would be the most dangerous, but the leg wound was actively killing the third man. She stripped off her coat, then her flannel shirt, leaving just the thermal underneath. She tore the flannel into strips and made a tourniquet, knowing it was crude but better than nothing. The unconscious men groaned as she moved them, checking for exit wounds, trying to assess what internal damage might be happening where she couldn't see. One bullet had gone clean through, which was good. The other was still inside, which wasn't. She stood up and looked around again, this time calculating distances and difficulties. Her cabin was 2 miles west. Her truck, parked behind the cabin, could maybe make it this far if she took it slow and didn't mind destroying what was left of her suspension. But moving these men without proper care could finish what the bullets had started. Duke barked once, sharp and insistent. Mabel turned to see what had caught his attention and spotted something half buried in the dirt near the largest man's hand. She picked it up, brushing away the dust. A map, folded and refolded so many times the creases had started to tear. She opened it carefully, her hands steadier than her heartbeat. The map showed the high desert region, marked with locations she recognized. Her cabin, the old copper mines, the town of Gallup, and other places, older places, locations she'd lived before the fire. Someone had drawn lines connecting them. Someone had been tracking her. She searched the men more thoroughly now, finding a wallet on the first man. Lucas Brenner, according to the driver's license. Nevada plates on the vehicle registration in his pocket. She found a pocket watch in his jacket, silver and tarnished, with initials engraved on the back. M.C. Her maiden name, Mabel Caldwell, before she'd married James Craine. The watch had belonged to her father. He'd given it to her brother before. She stopped that thought before it could finish. She'd had no brother. She was an only child, or that's what she'd always been told. The second man's wallet identified him as Garrett Thorne, Wyoming. The third man, the one with the leg wound, was Cole Brenner. Same last name as the first man. Brothers, maybe, or cousins. She found the letter sewn into Garrett's jacket lining by accident, her fingers catching on the stitching while checking for more injuries. The thread was different from the rest, newer, deliberately hidden. She tore it free and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but protected by the fabric. The handwriting stopped her heart. James. Her husband's handwriting, as familiar as her own. The letter was addressed to M.C., her initials, dated 2 weeks before the fire. Her hands shook as she read, "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it. I'm sorry. I should have told you everything from the start, but I thought I could handle it alone, keep you and Cole safe by keeping you ignorant. I was wrong. There are things you need to know about my family, about what I witnessed, about why we're in danger. My brother, yes. I have a brother. I never told you he'll come looking eventually. Trust him. He has proof, documents I couldn't get to, evidence that will make sense of all this. But more importantly, trust yourself. You're stronger than you know. Take care of our boy. Make sure he knows I loved him. And if the worst happens, if they get to me before I can fix this, then run. Get as far away as you can, but someday when it's safe, come back. The truth is buried but not dead. Someone will dig it up eventually. When they do, be ready. I love you. I'm sorry I failed you. James. Mabel read it twice, then a third time, trying to make the words mean something different than what they clearly said. A brother. Evidence. A conspiracy she'd only half glimpsed 30 years ago, now confirmed by her dead husband's hand. The man she'd identified as Lucas Brenner stirred. His eyes opened, clearer now, though still glazed with pain and shock. He looked at her, really looked, and something like recognition crossed his face. "Aunt Mabel," he whispered. Then his eyes rolled back and consciousness left him again. "Aunt Mabel." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Duke barked again, this time facing west. Mabel's instincts kicked in, 30 years of survival overriding the emotional chaos. They needed to move. These men needed medical attention, and whoever had shot them might come back to finish the job. She made her decision in seconds: leave Duke to guard them, run back to the cabin, get the truck and her medical supplies, return and transport them before they died or their attackers returned. Simple, dangerous, necessary. "Stay," she told Duke, touching his head. He understood, settling into a watchful crouch beside the injured men. Mabel ran. The rifle bounced against her back, her boots pounded the hard ground, and her mind raced faster than her legs. A brother James never mentioned, a nephew calling her aunt, a map that tracked her across 30 years of hiding, a letter that confirmed her worst suspicions about the fire that took everything. These weren't strangers dying under the bridge. This was her past, bleeding out in the desert, demanding she finally stop running and face what she'd been avoiding for 3 decades. The cabin came into view. She didn't slow down. The truck complained all the way back to the bridge, gears grinding, suspension protesting every rock and rut. Mabel had loaded the bed with everything she might need: her field medicine kit, blankets, water, a tarp, rope. The medical kit was comprehensive, built up over years of treating herself and Duke for everything from cuts to infections. She'd learned trauma medicine from books and necessity, and while she was no doctor, she'd kept herself alive this long. Duke's bark reached her before she could see him. Still alive, then. Still protecting. She pulled up as close as she dared to the bridge supports and killed the engine. All 3 men were still breathing, though the one called Cole, the one with the leg wound, looked worse. His skin had gone grey, lips blue-tinged. Shock and blood loss. She had maybe an hour before his body gave up, entirely. Moving them proved harder than she'd anticipated. Lucas, the largest, took all her strength just to drag to the truck bed. She couldn't lift him, so she used the rope and leverage, pulling him onto the tarp, and then using the tarp to slide him up a makeshift ramp of boards she kept in the truck for exactly this kind of emergency. Garrett came easier. He was leaner, lighter, but still dead weight in every sense of the term. Cole she saved for last, the tourniquet on his leg already loosening, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. She tightened it again, knowing every minute the tourniquet stayed on increased the risk of losing the leg, but losing the leg was better than losing his life. Duke jumped into the truck bed without being told, positioning himself among the injured men like a living guardrail. Smart dog. Loyal dog. The drive back tested every skill she had. Slow enough not to jostle them to death, fast enough to matter. She talked to them the whole way, not sure if they could hear, but needing the sound of her own voice to keep the panic at bay. "You're going to be fine, all 3 of you. I've dealt with worse." That was a lie, but it sounded good. "Just hold on. My cabin's got everything we need." The cabin waited, door standing open from when she'd run out, the interior dark and familiar. She'd set it up years ago, with medical emergencies in mind, her own, mostly, but the principle held. Clear space near the stove where she could lay them out. Clean sheets she could sacrifice. Boiled water always on hand. Getting them inside took another hour of hard work that left her sweating despite the cold. She laid them out in a row, each man on a pallet of blankets, close enough to the stove for warmth, but not so close they'd overheat. Then she stripped away their ruined clothes and began the real work. Cole first. Always treat the most critical patient first. She released the tourniquet gradually, watching blood flow return to the leg, checking for pulses below the wound. Faint but present. Good. The bullet had missed the femoral artery by inches. Lucky, incredibly lucky, but it had shattered bone. She could feel the fragments when she probed the wound, could see the unnatural angle of the leg. She cleaned the wound as best she could, flushed it with sterile saline she'd stockpiled, then packed it with gauze soaked in honey. Old remedy, pre-antibiotic, but honey was antibacterial, and she'd used it before with success. Then she splinted the leg, immobilizing it completely, and started an IV line she'd scavenged from veterinary supplies years ago. Saline drip, slow and steady. Keep him hydrated, give his body resources to work with. Garrett next. His torso wound was cleaner, the bullet having gone through without hitting anything immediately vital, or at least nothing she could see. But internal bleeding remained a risk, and there was nothing she could do about that except watch and hope. She cleaned, packed, bandaged, elevated his feet to help with circulation, then moved to Lucas. Lucas worried her most. The bullet was still inside, lodged somewhere in his left chest cavity. She could see the entry wound, small and dark, but no exit. Removing it required more skill than she had, more equipment than she possessed, but leaving it might kill him just as surely. She made the hard choice. Clean the wound, bandage it, watch for infection. Hope his body could handle the foreign object until proper medical help became available if it ever did. By the time she finished the initial treatment, dawn had given way to full morning, and her arms ached with exhaustion. She checked vitals on all three men. Pulses remained weak but steady, breathing regular if shallow. They were stabilized for now. Duke lay beside Cole, his head on his paws, watching the young man's chest rise and fall. Mabel sat down heavily on the floor beside the dog, let her hand rest on his warm fur, and finally allowed herself to really look at the men she'd brought into her home. Lucas had her father's build, broad-shouldered and solid. Garrett had sharp features that reminded her of James's side of the family, assuming James really had a brother she'd never known about. But Cole had her eyes. Not just the color, though that matched, but the shape, the way they sat in his face, the particular arch of the brow above them. He had James's nose, straight and narrow. His hands, long-fingered and scarred from work, looked like hands that had held tools, fixed things, built things. Like James's hands. She pulled the pocket watch from where she'd stashed it, turned it over in her palm. The initials M.C. stared back at her, accusing and familiar. Her father had carried this watch every day of his working life. When he died, he'd left it to his son. The son Mabel had never known existed. Her mother had died when Mabel was 12. Cancer, quick and brutal. Her father had raised her. Alone after that, or she'd thought he'd raised her alone. But before Mabel was born, before her mother got sick, had there been another child? A son who'd left or been sent away? The numbers didn't quite work. Her father would have been in his 20s when... She stopped, rewound her assumptions. What if the watch hadn't been her father's? What if it had been her grandfather's, passed down through the male line, a tradition she'd never known about because she was female and therefore outside that particular inheritance? Lucas stirred, a groan escaping his lips. Mabel moved to his side, checked his pulse, felt his forehead for fever. Warm, but not hot. Not yet. His eyes opened, clearer than before, but heavy with pain and confusion. He looked at her for a long moment, studying her face the same way she'd studied his. "You've found us," he said, voice rough as gravel. "My dog found you. I just followed." "Duke," he said the name like he knew it, like he'd expected it. James wrote about Duke in his journals. Said if you had a dog named Duke, it meant you'd survived. Mabel's throat tightened. "James died 30 years ago." "I know." Lucas tried to sit up, failed, fell back with a grimace. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry we led them to you. Who are you?" The question came out harder than she intended, sharp with 3 decades of grief and confusion. Lucas closed his eyes, gathering strength. When he opened them again, they held something. Mabel recognized the look of someone about to confess a truth that would change everything. "I'm your nephew," he said. "James was my uncle. My father was his brother, and we came here to find you because..." He stopped. Pain or emotion, or both, cutting off the words. "Because what?" "Because your son didn't die in the fire," Lucas whispered. "Cole survived. We think we know where he is. And we need your help to find him." The room tilted. Mabel sat back hard, her hands bracing against the floor, her mind trying to process words that couldn't possibly be true, but felt true in a way that bypassed logic entirely. Cole survived. Her baby boy, her son, The child she'd mourned for 30 years had survived. She looked at the 3 men on her floor, strangers who'd brought her impossible news, and felt 30 years of grief crack open like a wound that had never properly healed. Duke whined softly, pressed against her side, offering the only comfort he knew how to give. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, reminding her that while everything had changed in here, the desert remained the same, vast and indifferent, and full of dangers that didn't care about family revelations or impossible hopes. Someone had shot these men. Someone had tried to kill them before they could reach her, which meant someone knew they were coming, someone knew where she was. Someone wanted the truth to stay buried. And for the first time in 30 years, Mabel Craine felt something other than grief and resignation. She felt rage. Mabel didn't sleep that first night. She sat between the 3 men, checking pulses, changing bandages, monitoring the IV drip she'd rigged for Cole. Every hour brought small changes. Garrett's breathing deepened, more regular. Lucas's fever climbed slightly, then stabilized. Cole remained the most critical, his body fighting shock and blood loss with resources he didn't have. Duke kept watch with her, moving between the men like he was counting them, making sure all 3 stayed alive through the dark hours. By dawn, Mabel had gone through every piece of clothing the men had been wearing, searching for answers. She found more questions instead. Receipts from gas stations tracking a route from Nevada through Utah and into New Mexico. A phone smashed beyond repair, probably during whatever confrontation left them shot and dying. And, in the lining of Garrett's jacket, carefully sewn in alongside the letter from James, she found another piece of paper. This one was newer, written in different handwriting, blocky, masculine, careful. It detailed a meeting time and location, coordinates that placed it somewhere in the mountains north of Gallup. The date was yesterday. The note ended with a single line, "Bring the woman if you can. She deserves to know." Mabel read it 3 times, her hands steady but her heart racing. Someone had set up a meeting. These men had been on their way to it when they were ambushed. And whoever wrote this note assumed they might bring her along, which meant someone knew she existed, knew she was out here, knew she mattered to whatever this was about. She looked at Lucas, still unconscious, his chest rising and falling, with the shallow breaths of someone whose body was focused entirely on surviving the next minute, then the next. He'd called her aunt. He'd said James had a brother. He'd said her Cole had survived. The impossibility of it pressed down on her like physical weight. She'd seen the bodies after the fire, or what was left of them. The coroner had identified them, James and infant Cole, through dental records and bone measurements. She'd attended the funeral, watched 2 caskets lowered into the ground, stood in the cemetery while well-meaning people told her time would heal the wound. But what if the coroner had lied? What if the bodies in those caskets weren't her family? What if the whole investigation had been orchestrated to convince her they were dead? She thought about the sheriff Raymond Calhoun and the way he'd looked at her when she'd asked her questions. Not sympathetic, not patient, something else. Something that in hindsight looked a lot like guilt or fear or both. Lucas stirred again, pulled from unconsciousness by pain or instinct. His eyes found hers immediately, focused despite the fever Mabel could see coloring his cheeks. "Water," he rasped. She helped him drink, supporting his head, letting him take small sips. When he'd had enough, she settled him back down and asked the question that had been building since dawn. "Tell me about James's brother." Lucas closed his eyes, gathering himself. "My father, his name was Mabel Craine. He and James were twins." Twins. Mabel felt the information slot into place with a click that resonated somewhere deep. She'd never met any of James's family. He'd said they were estranged, that he'd left that life behind, that she was his family now. She'd accepted it because she'd loved him and because her own family situation was equally complicated. "James never mentioned him," she said. No, he wouldn't have. They'd agreed to stay separated, keep distance between them for safety. Michael was... Lucas stopped, coughed, winced at the pain it caused. He was involved in something, investigating something. James got pulled into it by accident, witnessed something he shouldn't have. They tried to protect each other by pretending they didn't exist to each other. But it didn't work. No. Lucas's voice dropped to almost a whisper. It didn't work. They killed James, tried to kill Cole. Would have succeeded except... He stopped again, this time not from pain but from something heavier. Except what? Except Raymond Calhoun had a partner, deputy named Tom Foster. He was first on scene that night. Found Cole in the yard, unconscious from smoke inhalation but alive. And instead of reporting it, instead of doing what he was supposed to do, Tom Foster took Cole and ran. Mabel's world narrowed to the sound of Lucas's voice, each word another piece of impossible truth. Tom couldn't save James, he was already gone. But he saved your son. Took him out of state, raised him as his own, gave him a different name, a different life, kept him hidden from the people who'd killed his father and wanted to eliminate any loose ends. Why? The word came out broken. Why would he do that? Because Tom Foster was a good man trapped in a bad situation. He'd been Calhoun's partner, had gone along with things he shouldn't have, looked the other way when he should have looked closer. But taking a baby from a burning house and letting him die when he could be saved, that was the line Tom couldn't cross. Lucas reached out with a shaking hand, found hers, held it with surprising strength. Tom raised Cole well, Mabel. Loved him like his own, taught him right from wrong, gave him a good life. But Tom died 6 months ago, and on his deathbed he told Cole everything. Told him about the fire, about his real parents, about why he'd done what he'd done. Mabel's eyes burned, but no tears came. She'd cried herself empty 30 years ago, or thought she had. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Where is my son?" Lucas's grip tightened. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Cole, your Cole. I mean, Tom's Cole. The man Tom raised, he disappeared right after Tom died. We think he went looking for answers. We've been tracking him for months, following the same trail he did, trying to find him before he stopped. But Mabel could fill in the rest. Before whoever killed James found him first. She looked at the young man Duke was guarding, the one they'd called Cole Brenner, the one with the shattered leg, and her eyes looking out of his face. "Who is he?" she asked, though part of her already knew, had known since she'd first seen him, since some instinct deeper than thought had recognized something in his features. Lucas followed her gaze. "That's Cole. Your Cole. Tom's Cole. He's your son, Mabel. We found him 3 days ago, and then they found us." And his voice broke. "We almost lost him again. We almost got him killed, bringing him to you." The room was silent except for breathing hers. Lucas's, the 3 unconscious men, Duke's steady presence. 30 years collapsed into this single moment, this impossible truth that felt more real than anything Mabel had allowed herself to believe since the fire. Her son was alive. Her son was here. Her son was dying on her floor because someone wanted to keep the truth buried. Mabel stood up, moved to Cole's side, knelt beside him. She studied his face, older, masculine, shaped by decades she'd missed, but still hers. She touched his forehead gently, felt fever heat radiating from skin that shared her blood. Duke looked at her, then at Cole, then back at her, as if confirming what Mabel's heart had already accepted. She'd spent 30 years running from the past. Now the past had found her anyway, bleeding and broken and desperately in need of saving. Outside, dawn broke fully over the high desert, painting the world in harsh light that revealed every detail, every truth, every danger that came with those truths. Somewhere out there, the people who'd killed James and tried to kill Cole were regrouping, planning their next move, deciding how to eliminate this new threat to their secrets. Mabel looked at the rifle leaning against the wall, at the supplies she'd stockpiled, at the defensive advantages of her cabin's position. She'd built this place to hide from the world. Now, she'd use it to fight. Let them come. Let them try. She'd lost her family once to these people. She wouldn't lose them again. 3 days passed before Cole opened his eyes. Mabel was changing his bandage when it happened, unwrapping the honey-soaked gauze from his leg wound, checking for infection. The fever had broken that morning, finally, after climbing so high she'd thought she might lose him. She'd spent 2 nights pressing cold cloths to his forehead, forcing water between his lips, talking to him even though he couldn't hear, telling him about the father he'd lost, the life they'd almost had together, the 30 years she'd spent believing he was dead. His eyes focused on her slowly, confusion giving way to awareness, then to something that looked like recognition, though that should have been impossible. "You're real," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Mabel's hands stopped moving. "I'm real," Tom said. Cole stopped, swallowed, tried again. "The man who raised me, Tom Foster, he said you had kind eyes. He said you were strong, that you survived things that would have broken most people. Tom Foster saved your life." The words came easier than Mabel expected. "He also stole it." No bitterness in Cole's voice, just fact. 30 years you thought I was dead. 30 years I didn't know you existed. He did what he thought was right. Did he? Cole tried to sit up, grimaced at the pain, fell back. Or did he do what was easy? Taking me was the brave part. Keeping me from you for 30 years, that was cowardice. Mabel had thought similar things over the past 3 days, wrestling with rage at the man who'd saved her son but stolen him in the same moment. But hearing Cole's voice, it made her want to defend the dead deputy anyway. "He kept you alive," she said. "That matters, does it? If survival means living a lie—" Cole closed his eyes, exhausted by the brief conversation. "I don't know who I am anymore. Tom's son? James Crane's son? Cole Foster? Cole Craine? Every name feels wrong now." Mabel finished rewrapping his leg in silence, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind struggled with unfamiliar territory. She'd imagined finding Cole someday, or him finding her, but in those fantasies he'd been the baby she'd lost, unchanged by time, still hers in every way that mattered. The reality was harder. The man on her floor was a stranger who happened to share her blood. 30 years had made him someone she didn't know. Lucas had recovered enough to sit up against the wall, watching their exchange with the careful attention of someone cataloguing family dynamics. Garrett remained weak but conscious, his torso wound healing slower than Mabel would have liked, but healing nonetheless. "There's something you both need to see," Lucas said, drawing their attention. He nodded toward the pack he'd been carrying when Duke found them, now sitting in the corner of the cabin. In the front pocket, "There's a wooden toy." Mabel retrieved it, her hands recognizing the shape before her eyes confirmed it. A horse, small enough to fit in a child's hand, carved from pine wood and polished smooth by years of handling. She'd made it in the weeks before Cole was born, a gift for the son she'd been so eager to meet. She turned it over in her hands, remembering the knife work, the late nights sitting on the porch while James read beside her, the way she'd imagined Cole playing with it someday, galloping it across the floor, creating the adventures only children could imagine. "Where did you get this?" Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Tom kept it," Cole said. "He told me it was mine, that my mother had made it. I carried it everywhere when I was young, lost it once, and cried for days until Tom drove 3 hours back to the place we'd been camping to find it. I stopped carrying it when I got older, but Tom kept it safe. Left it with his lawyer, with instructions to give it to me along with the letter explaining everything." Mabel looked at her son, 32 years old, a grown man with his own history and scars, and saw the baby she'd carved this toy for. The two images overlapped, past and present colliding in a way that made her chest ache with loss and relief in equal measure. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. Not being there, not knowing, not being able to give him the childhood she'd planned. "Don't be." Cole's eyes, so like her own, held steady on hers. "You didn't choose this. None of us did. We're all victims of whatever James witnessed that night. That's what we need to talk about, Lucas interjected. He pulled a folder from his pack, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. We've been investigating for 2 years. We know what James saw. We know why they killed him. He spread papers across the floor between them, documents, photographs, maps. Mabel moved closer, Cole struggling to prop himself up enough to see. James worked for the county assessor, Lucas explained. His job was evaluating properties for tax purposes, checking titles, making sure everything was legal. About a month before the fire, he was assigned to assess a large piece of land north of Gallup. Old ranch property, mostly unused, owned by a consortium of investors. Lucas pulled out a photograph showing a deed. James found discrepancies. The land had been purchased from the federal government years earlier for pennies on the dollar, using falsified surveys that made it look worthless. But the surveys were wrong, deliberately wrong. The property sat on top of significant copper deposits. Fraud, Mabel said. Massive fraud. Millions of dollars in copper rights sold for a few $1,000s. The consortium knew what they were buying. They bribed the surveyor, bribed the land office clerks, bribed anyone who might notice. Then they sat on the land, waiting for the statute of limitations to run out on the fraud charges before they started mining. Garrett spoke up for the first time, his voice weak but clear. James didn't just find the fraud. He found the names, state legislators, federal officials, local businessmen, all of them profiting from stolen copper. He documented everything, Lucas continued. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Then he made copies and sent one to my father. That's what got him killed. Mabel studied the documents, seeing her husband's handwriting in the margins, his careful notes, his methodical approach to gathering evidence. She'd known he was meticulous, but she'd never known he was brave enough to take on people with this much money and power. "Where's the original?" she asked. Lucas pointed to another document in the pile. "That's what we're trying to figure out. James made 3 copies, sent them to 3 different people for safekeeping. My father got one. A lawyer in Santa Fe got another. The 3rd copy," he paused, looking at Mabel with something like apology. "James wrote in his journal that he gave the 3rd copy to someone he trusted completely. Someone who didn't know what it was, or why it mattered. Someone who'd keep it safe without realizing its significance. He gave it to me." Mabel's words came out flat, certain. She remembered now, hazily, James handing her an envelope a week before the fire, asking her to keep it in a safe place, saying it was insurance paperwork, but he wanted it somewhere separate from their other documents. She'd put it in her cedar chest, the one her mother had left her, full of quilts and photographs and other things too precious to lose. The cedar chest she'd hauled out to the desert 30 years ago and buried near the old trestle bridge, unable to look at the memories it contained, but unwilling to destroy them. "I know where it is," she said. "I know where James hid the evidence." And in that moment, everything changed. They weren't just victims anymore, people hiding from the past. Outside, Duke barked once, sharp and warning. Mabel's head snapped up, instincts honed by 30 years of solitude, screaming danger. Someone was coming. Mabel moved before her mind had fully processed the threat. She grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber, positioned herself at the window where she could see without being seen. Duke's growl rumbled low and continuous, his body tense and ready. A single vehicle approached on the rough track that passed for a road out here. White SUV, expensive and clean, completely wrong for this terrain. It stopped 50 yards from the cabin, engine idling. Nobody got out. "How many people know about this place?" Lucas asked, struggling to his feet despite his wounds. "Nobody. I made sure of that." But even as Mabel said it, she knew it wasn't true anymore. These men had found her, which meant whoever shot them could follow the same trail. The SUV's door opened. A man stepped out, hands visible and empty, his posture deliberately unthreatening. Late 60s, expensive clothes gone dusty from the drive, moving with the careful confidence of someone used to being in control. Mabel didn't recognize his face, but she recognized the type. Money and authority worn like armor. "Mrs. Craine," the man called out. His voice carried easily across the distance, cultured and calm. "My name is Harrison Webb. I'd like to talk to you about a matter of mutual concern." She said nothing, just kept the rifle trained on his center mass. "I know you have 3 injured men in there," Webb continued. "I know they came to find you. I know why." He paused. "Let that sink in. I also know that 30 years ago, your husband discovered something that certain people wanted to keep quiet. I'm here to resolve that situation peacefully." "You're 30 years too late for peaceful," Mabel called back. Webb had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I wasn't involved in what happened then, but I'm involved now, and I'm trying to prevent more violence. May I approach? I promise I mean no harm." "Promises from men like you aren't worth the air they waste," Mabel said, but she didn't shoot him. Not yet. Cole had pulled himself to a sitting position, his face pale but determined. "Let him come," he said quietly. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Mabel wanted to refuse, wanted to send Webb running back to whatever comfortable office he'd crawled out of. But Cole was right. Information was survival, and they needed every advantage they could get. "Come ahead," she called. "Slow. Hands where I can see them." Webb approached like a man walking through a minefield, each step measured and careful. When he reached the porch, Mabel opened the door but kept the rifle pointed at his chest. Up close, Webb looked older than she'd thought. Lines around his eyes spoke of stress and sleepless nights. His hands, soft and manicured, trembled slightly. "May I come in? Say what you came to say from there." Webb glanced at the 3 men visible through the doorway, his eyes lingering on Cole. "You found him?" "I'm surprised. Impressed, honestly. Tom Foster did excellent work keeping him hidden." "Tom Foster is dead. I know. Natural causes, I'm told." Webb's tone suggested he actually regretted that. "He was a good man caught in an impossible situation." "Skip the eulogies," Lucas said from inside. "Tell us why you're here." Webb sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "I'm here because the people responsible for killing James Craine are getting nervous. They've spent 30 years keeping this quiet. And now suddenly there are people digging up the past, asking questions, looking for evidence they thought was safely destroyed." "The copper fraud," Mabel said. "You know about that." Webb didn't sound surprised. "Then you know we're talking about powerful people. Senators, federal judges, men who've built empires on the foundation of that one illegal land deal. Men like you? Men like my father, actually. I inherited his share of the consortium, along with the knowledge of how he acquired it." Webb met her eyes steadily. "I didn't choose this legacy, Mrs. Craine, but I'm trying to clean it up before more people die." "Noble of you," Garrett said, his voice dripping sarcasm. "Not noble, pragmatic." Webb pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, moving slowly to avoid spooking Mabel's trigger finger. "This is a sworn confession. Everything I know about the fraud, the cover-up, the murder, names, dates, dollar amounts. I'm prepared to turn it over to federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity." "Why?" Cole asked. "Why betray the people who made betray? You rich?" "Because I have children," Webb said simply. "Grandchildren. And I'd like to be able to look them in the eye without shame. The money's already made, the damage already done. The statute of limitations ran out on the fraud 20 years ago, but murder has no statute of limitations, and I won't be complicit in covering up murder anymore." Mabel studied him, trying to determine if this was genuine conscience or sophisticated manipulation. "You said people are getting nervous." "Who specifically?" "Raymond Calhoun, for one. He's the one who shot your 3 friends here. He's afraid that if the truth comes out about the fire, his role in it will be exposed. He'll spend his last years in prison instead of living comfortably on his pension. Good, Mabel said flatly. Perhaps, but a cornered animal is dangerous, Mrs. Craine. And Calhoun isn't alone. There are others, younger men with more to lose, who'll do whatever it takes to keep this quiet. Webb's voice dropped. I'm told there's another copy of James's evidence, hidden somewhere. If that's true, and if you know where it is, you need to understand that every day you keep it hidden is another day those people have to find you and kill you. The truth of that settled over the cabin like dust. Webb was right. They couldn't hide forever, couldn't fight indefinitely against people with resources and connections far beyond their own. What are you proposing? Lucas asked. Give me the evidence. I'll combine it with my confession and take everything to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Albuquerque. Federal charges, federal protection, federal jurisdiction, too big for local corruption to bury. Webb looked at each of them in turn. In exchange, I guarantee your safety, all of you. Money for medical care, new identities if you want them, relocation assistance, whatever it takes to make sure you survive this. And what do you get out of it? Mabel asked. Besides a clear conscience, immunity from prosecution, the chance to die free instead of dying in prison, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, the opportunity to break the cycle of corruption my father started. Webb smiled sadly. I'm not a good man, Mrs. Craine, but I'm trying to be better than I was yesterday. Mabel wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this could end peacefully, that justice could be served without more bloodshed. But 30 years of isolation had taught her that trust was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. I need time to think, she said. Time is what we don't have. Calhoun knows I'm here. He'll see it as betrayal, which means he'll act soon. Tonight, maybe. Tomorrow, at the latest. Webb backed away slowly, heading toward his vehicle. I'll be at the Gallup Inn, room 12. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. After that, I can't protect you anymore. He drove away, leaving nothing but dust and doubt in his wake. Mabel closed the door, leaned the rifle against the wall, and turned to face the 3 men who'd brought the past crashing into her carefully constructed present. What do we do? Garrett asked. Cole answered before Mabel could. We dig up the evidence. We verify everything, Webb said. Then we decide who to trust. Nobody, Mabel said. We trust nobody but ourselves. She looked at her son, wounded but alive, angry but determined, and made a decision that would either save them all or destroy them. I'll take you to the bridge tomorrow. We'll retrieve what James hid. And then she paused, feeling the weight of 30 years lifting off her shoulders, replaced by something heavier and sharper. Purpose. Then we finish what my husband started. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the high desert in shades of orange and red that looked like warnings. Night was coming, and with it, all the dangers that darkness brought. But for the first time in 3 decades, Mabel Craine wasn't afraid of the dark. They never made it to the bridge. Dawn came with the sound of engines, multiple vehicles, approaching from different directions, surrounding the cabin in a coordinated assault that spoke of military planning and serious intent. Mabel was awake instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window before her mind fully processed what she was hearing. 6 trucks, maybe 8 men visible, probably more hidden. They'd set up a perimeter while darkness still held, waited until dawn to announce themselves. Mrs. Craine. The voice came through a megaphone, amplified and distorted but still recognizable. Raymond Calhoun, older now, rougher, but still carrying the authority of a man who'd worn a badge for 40 years. We need to talk. We've got nothing to say to each other. Mabel called back. I think we do. I think we've got 30 years of conversation to catch up on. Lucas and Garrett were up now, moving despite their injuries, checking weapons and ammunition. Cole struggled to stand, his splinted leg making him vulnerable, making him a liability in any fight. Duke positioned himself between Cole and the door, hackles raised. "What do you want, Calhoun?" "Same thing I've always wanted. Peace and quiet. My retirement, my pension, my life, lived out without complications." The megaphone crackled. "You had that too, Mabel. 30 years of peace out here, nobody bothering you, nobody asking questions. Why couldn't you leave well enough alone?" "Because my son was alive and you helped steal him from me." Silence from outside. Long enough that Mabel wondered if she'd miscalculated, revealed too much, too soon. Then Calhoun's voice came back, different now. Surprised, maybe even impressed. "You figured it out. I wondered if you would." Tom swore he'd never tell, and he kept that promise until the cancer got him. Must have said something on his deathbed. "He told Cole everything," Mabel said. "Names, dates, details, all of it." Tom was sentimental. "I told him years ago that keeping the boy alive was a mistake. Should have left him in that house to burn with his daddy." No emotion in Calhoun's voice, just cold calculation. But Tom couldn't do it. "Had to play hero. Had to save one life to balance out all the ones we didn't save." Cole's face had gone white, his hands gripping the edge of the table for support. Hearing the truth spoken so casually, hearing how close he'd come to death, seemed to hit harder than the bullets had. "You killed James," Mabel said, needing to hear it confirmed, needing the truth spoken aloud. "I supervised. Didn't pull the trigger myself, that was my deputy, man named Rowe, died in a car accident a few years back. Convenient timing, that." Calhoun almost sounded amused. "James was a problem. Smart man, thorough man, but he didn't understand how things work. Some secrets are worth more than individual lives. The copper rights from that land deal have generated over $200 million in the past 30 years. $200 million divided among 15 families. You think we'd let one county assessor destroy that because he got a conscience?" Lucas had positioned himself at the back window, covering the rear approach. "He's stalling," he said quietly, "talking while his men move into position." "I know." Mabel had seen this tactic before, during her years of study after the fire, reading about tactical situations, learning how to think like the people who might come for her. "He wants us to surrender peacefully. Or he wants us distracted while he burns us out," Garrett added. Calhoun's voice came again. "I know you've got James's evidence. Webb told me before I persuaded him to call me instead of the feds." Poor Harrison. He actually thought he could buy redemption with a confession. Didn't realize he was already too deep, too guilty, too implicated to ever get clean. Mabel's stomach dropped. Webb's confession had been a trap. Or worse, Webb had been compromised, threatened, turned before he ever reached her cabin. "So, here's how this works," Calhoun continued. "You give me whatever James hid, all copies, all documents, everything. In exchange, I let you live. Not here, you'll have to relocate, obviously, but alive. You can even keep the boy, since Tom already raised him and killing him now would just be wasteful. And Lucas and Garrett? They're loose ends, nothing personal, but they know too much, and they're not family. They die regardless." Lucas and Garrett exchanged glances, no fear in their expressions. Just grim acceptance that they'd known this was a possibility when they started investigating. "Counter-proposal," Mabel called. "You and your men leave now. We keep the evidence, but we don't use it. Mutually assured destruction. You leave us alone, we leave you alone. Can't do it. Too many people involved now, too many questions being asked. The only way this ends quietly is if everyone who knows the truth is dead or too scared to talk." Calhoun paused. "You've got 10 minutes to decide. After that, we come in. And Mabel, I want you to understand something. I don't want to kill you. You've suffered enough. But I will if I have to. 10 minutes." The megaphone went silent. Mabel turned to face the three men who'd brought this storm down on her. There's a tunnel. Dug it years ago as an escape route, comes out about 200 yards north in a dry wash. Cole, you go first. Lucas and Garrett, you cover him. What about you? Cole asked. I'm staying. Someone needs to hold them off, make them think we're all still here. No. Cole's voice held an authority that surprised her. 30 years we've been apart. I'm not losing you now. You won't lose me. I know this land, know every rock and gully. I can hold them long enough for you to get clear, then slip out the tunnel after you. She's right, Lucas said quietly. It's the smart play. Smart doesn't matter. She's my mother. I just found her. I'm not leaving her to die. The words hung in the air between them. My mother. The first time Cole had claimed her that way, the first time he'd acknowledged what his blood already knew, Mabel felt something crack open in her chest. 30 years of ice melting in an instant. She moved to Cole's side, took his face in her hands, looked into eyes that reflected her own. I'm not dying today, she said. But I can't run and fight at the same time. None of us can. So you go. You get to safety, and you wait for me. That's an order from your mother. Cole's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I don't take orders well. Bad habit I picked up from the woman who gave birth to me, apparently. Despite everything, Mabel smiled. Let me protect my son the way I should have protected him 30 years ago. The sound of boots on gravel reached them, Calhoun's men moving into position, tightening the noose. Time was running out. There's something you should know, Garrett said suddenly. He looked at Mabel, at Cole, his face holding an expression she couldn't quite read. We lied to you. Or rather, we didn't tell you the complete truth. Garrett, don't... Lucas started, but Garrett cut him off. She deserves to know before this goes any further. He turned to Cole. You're not Tom's son. I mean, Tom raised you, loved you like a son, but you're not some random kid he saved from a fire. Look at Mabel. Really look at her. Cole's confusion was evident. I have. I know she's my mother. We've established that. No. Garrett's voice was gentle but insistent. Look at yourself. Look at the shape of your hands, the way you move, the particular angle of your jaw. Then look at the photograph on the mantel. The one of James Craine holding his infant son. Mabel's heart stopped. She looked at Cole, then at the photograph, then back at Cole. The baby in that picture had a distinctive birthmark, visible even in the faded photo, a small, dark mark on his left shoulder blade, shaped almost like a star. She'd kissed that mark 1,000 times during Cole's first year of life. With shaking hands, Mabel reached out and pulled down the collar of Cole's shirt, exposing his shoulder. The birthmark was there, faded with age, stretched by growth, but unmistakable. Oh my God, she whispered. Tom didn't save some random child from the fire, Lucas said quietly. He saved your child. Cole is your son. The real Cole. The baby you thought died 30 years ago. He's been alive this whole time. The room tilted. 30 years of grief collapsed into joy so intense it felt like pain. Cole, her baby, her son was alive, was here, was looking at her with dawning understanding in his eyes. The bodies in the caskets, she started, were never identified. Lucas finished. Calhoun provided the dental records himself, falsified them. There was no infant body found in that fire, Mabel. James died, but Cole lived. Tom took him that night and never looked back. Cole's hand found hers, gripped it tight. I'm your son. You're my son, Mabel repeated, and the truth of it settled over her like grace. Outside, Calhoun's voice came through the megaphone one last time. Time's up, Mabel. Last chance. Come out or we're coming in. Mabel looked at her son, at the men who'd brought him back to her, and made her choice. We fight, she said. We fight and we survive and we finish this. Together. Duke barked agreement, and the siege began. The first move was hers, and it had to count. Mabel dropped to the floor, crawled to the storage area beneath her bed, and pulled out the fireproof lockbox she'd buried in the floorboards 15 years ago. Inside were James's journals, detailed accounts she'd finally read completely after Lucas mentioned them, working through them during the long nights while her son recovered. James had known he was going to die. Not when or how, but he'd known the people he'd crossed wouldn't let him live. So he'd documented everything, every meeting, every name, every corrupt transaction he'd uncovered. The journals were insurance, proof, and confession, all rolled into leather-bound pages that smelled of old paper and desperate hope. "Lucas, you're strong enough to make it to the tunnel?" "I'll make it." "Garrett?" "Right behind him." "Then here's the plan." Mabel spread the journals across the floor, along with the documents Lucas had brought. "We send Duke through the tunnel first, with one journal strapped to his collar. If we don't make it, if Calhoun wins, Duke knows how to reach Gallup." "He'll find help," Cole protested immediately. "We can't send Duke out there alone." "We can, and we will. He's our insurance policy." Mabel looked at her dog, her companion through 30 years of isolation, and felt her throat tighten. "Duke, come." The German shepherd obeyed, sitting patiently while Mabel secured one of James's journals in a waterproof bag and strapped it to his collar with leather ties. She wrote a quick note, "To whoever finds this dog, take him to the FBI. The journal explains everything. Raymond Calhoun killed James Craine in 1995. We need help. Mabel Craine." She sealed the note with the journal and looked into Duke's intelligent eyes. "Find help, boy. Find someone who can help us," Duke whined, understanding on some level that this was goodbye, that Mabel wasn't coming with him this time. "Go," she said, pointing to the tunnel entrance hidden behind a false cabinet. "Go now." Duke went, disappearing into darkness, carrying with him their best chance at justice if everything went wrong. Calhoun's voice came through the megaphone again. "Mabel, we can do this easy or hard. Your choice. How about we do it fair?" Mabel shouted back, "You and me, Calhoun, just us. Leave these boys alone and we'll settle this like adults." Silence. Then, "I'm an old man, Mabel. You really think I'm dumb enough to face you? One-on-one? I've heard stories about what you can do." "No thanks." "Coward. Practical. There's a difference." Calhoun sounded amused. "Tell you what, though. Send out the evidence and I'll make it quick. You won't suffer. That's the best offer you're going to get." Mabel checked her ammunition. 3 rifles, 2 handguns, enough rounds to hold off a small army if she was smart about it. The cabin had good sightlines, reinforced walls she'd built with exactly this scenario in mind, even if she'd never truly believed it would happen. "We need to move the fight outside," Lucas said, thinking tactically. "If they set fire to the cabin, we're done." "Agreed, but we can't all go. Someone needs to stay here, make them think we're fortified and scared." "I'll stay," Cole said immediately. "No. You're injured. You'll slow us down in the field, but you can shoot from the windows here." Mabel handed him a rifle, made sure he had ammunition within reach. "You hold the cabin, make noise, make them think we're all here. Lucas, Garrett, and I will circle around, hit them from behind." "That's suicide," Garrett said. "They'll cut you down the moment you leave cover." "Not if we use the terrain right. I've been studying this land for 30 years. I know every depression, every rock formation, every place the sun creates shadows." Mabel moved to the back window, pointed to the route she'd mapped in her mind. "There's a dry wash that runs parallel to the cabin. We can use it for cover, get within 50 yards of their position without being seen." "And then what?" Lucas asked. "Then we take out their vehicles. Disable them so they can't chase us or escape. That levels the playing field." Cole had been quiet, listening, his face tight with pain and fear, not for himself but for her. Now he spoke up. "When this is over, when we've survived this, you're going to tell me everything. Every story about Dad, every memory from before the fire, everything I missed. That's the deal." Mabel felt tears threaten but forced them back. That's the deal. She moved to the mantel, took down the old photograph of James holding infant Cole, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. 30 years she'd carried grief. Now she'd carry hope instead. Time to move. They slipped out the back while Cole fired shots from the front windows, keeping Calhoun's attention focused on the cabin. The dry wash was exactly where Mabel remembered, deep enough to conceal them, narrow enough to move through quickly. Lucas and Garrett followed her lead, trusting her knowledge of the terrain, trusting her judgment despite having known her less than a week. That trust meant something. Maybe it meant everything. The sound of gunfire echoed across the desert, Cole's rifle, carefully rationed shots that suggested someone defending a position but conserving ammunition. Smart boy. Her boy. They covered 100 yards in 5 minutes, crawling on their bellies the last 50 feet to reach. A position behind Calhoun's line, 6 men visible, spread out in a loose perimeter, 2 more probably circling to flank the cabin. Calhoun himself stood behind an expensive pickup truck, megaphone in one hand, radio in the other, directing his men like pieces on a chessboard. Mabel lined up her first shot. Not at a person she wasn't ready to kill yet, wasn't sure she ever would be, but at the truck's front tire. She fired. The tire exploded with a satisfying pop, the truck listing sideways. Chaos erupted. Calhoun's men spun, trying to locate the new threat, suddenly realizing they were exposed from behind. Mabel fired again, taking out a second vehicle's tire. Lucas and Garrett opened up, their shots precise and devastating, disabling another truck and sending Calhoun's men scrambling for cover. "Fall back!" Calhoun shouted, his composure cracking. "Fall back to secondary position." But there was no secondary position. Mabel had chosen this ground carefully. Open desert in all directions, nowhere to hide, nowhere to run to. Calhoun's overwhelming force advantage meant nothing without cover. One of Calhoun's men broke ranks, sprinting toward a rock formation. Mabel tracked him, fired a shot that kicked up dirt at his feet. He dove behind the rocks, pinned down, but alive. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed," she called out. "Your fight's with Calhoun, not with us. Walk away now and you live." 2 men took her up on the offer immediately, dropping their weapons and running for the remaining functional vehicles. They peeled out, leaving Calhoun with 4 men and dwindling options. Traitors! Calhoun screamed after them, but his voice had lost its authority. He was just an old man now, watching his carefully constructed power crumble in the desert sun. Mabel moved positions, using the terrain to stay hidden while closing distance. 50 yards became 40, then 30. Lucas and Garrett provided covering fire, keeping Calhoun's remaining men suppressed. Then she heard it, the distant sound of vehicles approaching from the west. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. Her heart sank. Reinforcements. Calhoun had called for backup. But as the vehicles came into view, Mabel saw something that made her breath catch. Federal plates. FBI windbreaker-wearing agents pouring out before the vehicles had fully stopped. And leading them, tail wagging despite everything, was Duke. The dog had found help, had made it to gallop, somehow communicated the urgency, somehow brought the cavalry back. Federal agents, a woman's voice, amplified, professional. "Everyone drop your weapons. This area is under federal jurisdiction." Calhoun's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, rage, fear, resignation. His remaining men dropped their weapons immediately, hands raised, no interest in adding federal charges to what was already a losing situation. But Calhoun didn't drop his gun. Instead, he turned toward the cabin where Cole was, still defending from the windows. "If I'm going down," Calhoun said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet, "I'm finishing what I started 30 years ago. That boy should have died in the fire. I'm going to correct that mistake." He raised his weapon, aimed at the cabin window where Cole's silhouette was visible. Mabel didn't think. She just moved. 30 years of grief and rage and protective instinct compressed into a single moment of absolute clarity. She fired. The shot took Calhoun in the shoulder, spinning him around, his gun falling from nerveless fingers. He dropped to his knees, clutching the wound, his face a mask of shock and pain. "That's for James," Mabel said quietly, lowering her rifle. "That's for every year I spent believing my son was dead. That's for every crime you committed and every life you destroyed." Federal agents swarmed Calhoun, taking him into custody, reading him rights he probably couldn't hear over his own cursing. His remaining men were cuffed and loaded into vehicles with professional efficiency. The woman who'd announced their arrival approached Mabel carefully, hands visible and empty. "Mrs. Craine? I'm Special Agent Victoria Chen. Your dog came to the Gallup Field office with a journal strapped to his collar. We've been looking for evidence against Raymond Calhoun for 2 years. You just handed us everything we needed." Mabel nodded, too exhausted for relief. "My son, he's in the cabin, he's injured. We've got EMTs standing by. He'll be taken care of. And my nephews, Lucas and Garrett Brenner, they've been shot. They need medical attention. Everyone's going to be taken care of, Mrs. Craine. You're safe now. It's over. Over." The word echoed in Mabel's mind as she walked back toward the cabin, Duke at her side, Lucas and Garrett following behind. 30 years of hiding, 30 years of grief, 30 years of survival, compressed into 5 days of violence and revelation. Cole met her at the door, leaning heavily on a crutch he'd improvised, his face streaked with dust and tears. Mother and son looked at each other. Really looked, seeing past the lost years to the connection that had never truly broken. "It's over," Mabel told him, echoing Agent Chen's words. "We're safe. We're together. It's finally over." Cole pulled her into an embrace that erased 3 decades in a heartbeat. "No," he said against her shoulder. "It's not over. It's just beginning." And standing there in the high desert morning with her son in her arms and justice finally within reach, Mabel Craine allowed herself to believe him. The federal agents turned Mabel's cabin into a command post within an hour. Medical personnel tended to Cole, Lucas, and Garrett, while investigators photographed everything, documented every piece of evidence, built their case against Calhoun and the larger conspiracy he represented. Special Agent Chen sat across from Mabel at her own kitchen table, a recording device between them, and asked her to tell the story from the beginning. So Mabel did. She talked about James and their life together, about the baby she'd loved for too brief a time, about the fire that took everything. She described 30 years of isolation, the skills she'd learned, the person she'd become in the absence of the family she'd lost. Chen listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her face professionally neutral, but her eyes reflecting something like empathy. "The journals," Chen said when Mabel finished. "James documented meetings with several individuals who are still alive, still in positions of power. Senators, federal judges, business executives. This case is going to be massive." "I don't care about massive," Mabel said. "I care that my son is alive, and the man who tried to take him from me is in custody. Raymond Calhoun will spend the rest of his life in prison. I can promise you that." Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "But there's something you need to understand. The people James exposed, the people who benefited from the copper fraud, they're going to fight this with every resource they have. Expensive lawyers, political connections, media manipulation. You and your family will be at the center of a very public, very ugly legal battle. Let them come." Mabel's voice was steady. "I've spent 30 years hiding. I'm done hiding." Cole limped over, his leg properly bandaged now, leaning on crutches the EMTs had provided. "We'll face it together," he said. "Whatever comes next, we face it as a family." Lucas and Garrett joined them, both looking better with IV fluids and proper medical care improving their conditions. "We've got evidence beyond James's journals," Lucas said. "Property records, financial documents, witness statements my father collected before he died. This case is solid." "It is," Chen agreed, "which is why I'm assigning protective custody to all of you until the major arrests are made. These people have killed before. They'll kill again if they think it'll protect them." "How long?" Mabel asked. "Weeks, maybe months, until we've secured enough testimony and evidence that eliminating witnesses won't help them anymore." The thought of leaving her cabin, even temporarily, made Mabel's chest tight. This place had been her sanctuary, her fortress, her home for 3 decades. But looking at Cole, her son, alive and healthy despite everything she knew, the cabin was just a structure. Home was wherever her family was. "What about Duke?" she asked. Chen smiled, the first genuine emotion Mabel had seen from the agent. "Your dog is a federal hero. He stays with you, wherever protective custody takes you." As if on cue, Duke padded over and rested his head on Mabel's knee. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the solid weight of his presence, the loyalty that had quite literally saved all their lives. "There's one more thing," Chen said. She pulled a file from her bag and laid it on the table. "Tom Foster, the deputy who saved Cole from the fire. We've been looking into his background, trying to understand his motivations." Mabel's hand stilled on Duke's head. "What did you find?" "Tom Foster was a good man, caught in a corrupt system. He took money from Calhoun for years, looked the other way on various crimes, participated in cover-ups. But he had a line he wouldn't cross. When Calhoun told him to let the baby die in that fire, Tom refused. He took Cole and disappeared for 3 days while Calhoun frantically tried to find him." Chen opened the file, revealing photographs and documents Mabel had never seen. Tom had a daughter who died in infancy, stillborn. His marriage didn't survive the grief. When he saw Cole, alive and healthy, and about to be murdered for the convenience of corrupt men, something in Tom broke. Or maybe something in him healed. He became the father he'd never gotten to be, and he protected Cole with everything he had. Cole's expression was complicated grief for the man he'd called father, anger at the lies, gratitude for the life he'd been given. "Tom loved me. I know that. Even knowing what he did, knowing he kept me from my real mother, I know he loved me." "Love doesn't excuse what he did," Mabel said quietly. "But I'm grateful for it anyway. He saved my son when I couldn't. That matters." Chen closed the file. "We'll need full statements from all of you. It's going to be a long process, testifying, depositions, trials. But when it's over, you'll have your lives back. Real lives, not just survival." Mabel looked around her cabin at the stone walls she'd built, the wood stove she'd installed, the weapons she'd maintained for defense she'd hoped would never come. She'd built this place to hide from the world. Now it was time to step back into it. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. We've got a safe house prepared, secure location, everything you'll need." "Then tonight," Mabel said. "Tonight, we spend here. One last night in the place that kept me alive long enough to find my family again." Chen nodded and left them alone, taking her team with her, leaving just the 4 of them, Mabel, Cole, Lucas, Garrett and Duke, sleeping peacefully by the fire. Family. After 30 years alone, Mabel had family again. The sun set over the high desert, painting the sky in colors that promised tomorrow would come, regardless of whether she was ready for it. She was ready. That last night in the cabin, Mabel cooked dinner for her family. Simple food, beans and cornbread, the kind of meal she'd made 1,000 times in 30 years of solitude. But cooking for 4 people instead of 1 transformed it into something different. Something that felt like the word she'd stopped believing in decades ago. Celebration. They ate at the table she'd built from salvaged lumber, plates passed back and forth, conversation flowing easier than it should have given how recently they'd all met. Lucas told stories about his father, Michael, and the obsession that had driven him to investigate James's death for years. Garrett shared his own connection to the family. His mother had been Michael's sister, making him another thread in a web of relations Mabel was only beginning to understand. Cole mostly listened, absorbing the history he'd been denied, occasionally asking questions about his father. Mabel answered what she could, painting a picture of James as she'd known him: kind, meticulous, brave in ways that didn't announce themselves until they mattered most. He would have loved you, she told Cole. Would have taught you to fish, to work with your hands, to think carefully before speaking. He was measured like that. Thoughtful. Tom taught me those things, Cole said. Maybe some of it was genetic, or maybe Tom learned them from James somehow before everything went wrong. Maybe both, Mabel said. Good men leave marks on the world. James left you. That's a mark that matters more than anything else he could have done. After dinner, they moved outside to the porch. The desert night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky in profusion that city dwellers never saw. Duke settled at Mabel's feet, content and watchful. What will you do? Lucas asked. After the trials, after everything's settled, will you come back here? Mabel looked at her cabin, her fortress, her refuge. I don't know. This place served its purpose. It kept me alive when I wanted to die. But staying here now would just be hiding again. Maybe it's time to find out what living looks like instead of just surviving. You could come to Nevada, Lucas suggested. I've got a ranch outside Elko. Plenty of space, good people, mountains if you miss the views. Or Wyoming, Garrett added. I'm renovating my grandfather's old place. Could use someone who knows construction. Cole hadn't spoken, but Mabel could feel him waiting, hoping. She turned to her son. What do you think? Where do we go from here? Wherever you want, Cole said. I've spent 32 years without a mother. I'm not making decisions that take you away from me now. You're a grown man. You've got your own life. I've got a life built on lies and stolen time. I'm ready to build something real. Cole's voice was steady, but his eyes held vulnerability that made Mabel's heart ache. I missed everything. First steps, first words, learning to ride a bike, high school graduation, all of it. I can't get that back. But I can have tomorrow and the day after, and every day that comes if you'll let me. Mabel reached out, took his hand, held it the way she'd held it when he was an infant, and the world still made sense. Every day, she promised, for as long as we both have. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the weight of the past begin to lift. Not gone, it would never be completely gone, but lighter, bearable. Around midnight, the federal agents returned with updates. Arrests had been made in 3 states. More would come as investigators worked through James's journals and the corroborating evidence. The news networks were already picking up the story. Corrupt land deal, decades-old murder, conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of power. You're going to be famous, Chen warned them. Media requests are already flooding in. Everyone wants to interview the mountain woman who took down a senator with her dead husband's journals and her German shepherd. Mabel grimaced. I don't want to be famous. Unfortunately, you don't have a choice. This is the biggest corruption case to hit the Southwest in 50 years. But we'll help you manage it, protect your privacy as much as possible. What about Calhoun? Cole asked. Singing like a bird. Chen almost smiled. Facing multiple murder charges, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. He's trying to plea bargain by giving up everyone above him. It's not going to save him, but it's making our job easier. Good, Mabel said simply. Chen left them alone again as midnight passed into the early hours of morning. One by one, they drifted inside to sleep, Lucas and Garrett on the floor, pallets that had held them when they first arrived, Cole on the couch, careful of his injured leg. Mabel stayed outside a while longer, Duke beside her, watching the desert prepare for dawn. This was the last time she'd see it as a place of hiding. From now on, it would just be a place she'd once lived, a chapter in a longer story. "Ready?" she asked Duke. He whined softly, pressed against her leg. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." They went inside together, and Mabel locked the door for the last time. 2 months later, Mabel stood in a courtroom in Albuquerque and watched Raymond Calhoun receive 5 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. The judge's voice was steady and cold as she detailed the crimes conspiracy to commit: murder, accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, corruption, witness tampering. The list went on, each charge another nail in the coffin of a man who'd thought himself untouchable. Calhoun looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, older, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with age. When he was led away in chains, he looked back once at Mabel. She met his eyes without flinching, without satisfaction, without anything but acknowledgement that this chapter was finally, completely closed. Cole sat beside her, his leg mostly healed, though he still walked with a slight limp the doctors said would fade with time. Lucas and Garrett flanked them on the other side, all of them dressed in clothes that felt foreign after weeks of protected isolation. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed, cameras and microphones, and shouted questions that Mabel ignored as they pushed through to the waiting federal vehicle. Agent Chen had warned them it would be like this, that the case had captured national attention, that their faces were now recognizable. Mabel hated it, but she endured it because some truths needed to be spoken publicly, some crimes needed to be exposed to sunlight before they could finally die. The safe house was temporary, a bland apartment in a bland complex that could have been anywhere in America. But it was secure and quiet, and it had been home for 2 months while the investigation and initial trials proceeded. Soon they'd be released from protective custody, free to build whatever life they chose. That evening, as sunset painted the Albuquerque sky in familiar desert colors, Cole brought out a cardboard box he'd been carrying since they left Nevada. "I want to show you something," he said. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, documenting 32 years of life Mabel had missed. Cole as a toddler, chubby-cheeked and laughing. Cole at 6, missing his front teeth. Cole at 13, all awkward angles and hopeful eyes. Cole at 20, at 25, at 30, aging through the years she'd spent alone. Tom Foster appeared in many of the photos, graying, weathered, smiling at the camera or at Cole with unmistakable love. There were birthday parties and fishing trips, school events, and quiet moments on a porch somewhere in Montana where Tom had taken them after leaving New Mexico. "This is your life," Mabel said, studying each photograph, memorizing details she could never experience firsthand. "This is the life Tom gave me," Cole corrected gently. "But it's not the life I was supposed to have. That's gone. We can't get it back." "No, we can't, but we can build something new, starting now. Starting with you telling me about my father, about your life together, about who I might have been if everything had gone differently." So Mabel told him. She started at the beginning, meeting James at a county fair, their courtship, the small wedding attended by people whose names she'd mostly forgotten. She told him about learning she was pregnant, about James's excitement and fear, about the way he'd talk to her belly at night, telling his unborn son about the world he'd be born into. She told him about the fire only briefly, the facts without the emotion, because that pain was too fresh even now. But she told him about the investigation she'd conducted alone, about the choice to disappear rather than die, about building the cabin and the life that had sustained her. "I thought about you every day," she said. "Every single day for 30 years. I'd wake up and the first thought in my mind was that you were gone. And now you're here, and I still can't quite believe it." Cole's eyes glistened, but he smiled. "Believe it. I'm here, I'm real, and I'm not going anywhere." Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine that felt like the foundation of something permanent. Mabel taught Cole to cook the way she'd learned in the desert, simple, practical, flavorful. Cole taught Mabel to use the smartphone the FBI had provided, showing her how to take photographs, how to send messages, how to stay connected in ways that 30 years of isolation had made foreign. Lucas visited frequently, bringing news about the ranch in Nevada and extending the invitation again. Garrett came too, sharing renovation plans for his grandfather's place, making it clear there was space for family if they wanted it. But Mabel and Cole didn't rush their decision. They were learning each other first, filling in the gaps, building a relationship that should have existed all along but had been stolen by men who valued money over human lives. One morning, Mabel woke to find a new photograph on the mantel of their temporary home. Recent, digital, printed on glossy paper. It showed 4 people and a dog: Mabel, Cole, Lucas, Garrett, and Duke, all of them smiling at the camera like people who'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. Beside it sat the old photograph from the cabin, James, holding infant Cole, time-faded but precious, past and present, loss and recovery, grief and joy, all existing together in a balance Mabel was learning to maintain. Agent Chen called that afternoon with news. "You're clear," she said. "Protective custody is lifted. You're free to go wherever you want, start over, build whatever life you choose." Mabel looked at Cole, who was teaching Duke a new trick in the living room, both of them focused and patient. She thought about the cabin in the desert, the fortress she'd built from grief and survival instinct. She thought about the future, undefined and open. "What do you think?" she asked Cole. "Nevada? Wyoming? Somewhere else entirely?" Cole considered, then smiled. "Wherever we go together. That's all that matters." "Together," Mabel agreed. She'd spent 30 years alone, believing she'd lost everything that mattered. Now, standing in a borrowed apartment with her found family around her, she understood that loss was never the end of the story. Sometimes it was just the middle, the difficult part that made the ending sweeter. Duke barked, tail wagging, ready for whatever came next. Mabel was ready too. The past would always be part of her, but it didn't own her anymore. James's memory lived on in the son they'd created together, in the justice finally served, in the love that had survived 3 decades of separation. Tomorrow they'd pack up and leave this temporary shelter. Tomorrow they'd begin building something real and lasting. Tomorrow they'd take the first steps into a future they'd earned through courage and persistence and the simple refusal to let evil win. But today, this moment, was enough. Family found, truth spoken, justice served. Mabel Craine, the mountain woman, had finally come home.